today, I want to talk about a moment that reveals the deep, often invisible layers of bias woven into our systems. A moment that challenges us to examine not just policies or procedures, but the very assumptions we carry. It begins with a routine traffic stop. A black man is pulled over by a white officer. The stop is tense, not because of any violation or threat, but because of a presumption based on skin color. The officer's tone is sharp, his questions invasive, his demeanor commanding. There is no courtesy, no explanation, no respect, only authority cloaked in suspicion. But then something shifts. The man produces identification, not just a driver's license, a badge, a title, and with it, the balance of power changes instantly. The officer's face falls, his voice changes. Suddenly, there is apology where there was aggression, respect where there was doubt. Because now, this black man isn't just anyone. He is someone with power, someone with oversight, someone who watches the watchers. This is not just a story about hypocrisy. It is about the conditions that allow such hypocrisy to exist. It's about how respect is too often reserved for status, not for humanity. About how fear or prejudice can shape a moment before words are even exchanged. And about how roles reverse not because truth was uncovered, but because power was revealed. The deeper tragedy is this: if that badge hadn't been there, if that title hadn't been disclosed, would anything have changed? Would that man's dignity, his rights, or his safety have mattered in the same way? This moment should not require a twist to be seen as wrong. It should not take a title to earn basic decency. We must ask ourselves, how many others have been treated unfairly simply because they could not flash a badge? How many stories end without a moment of realization? Just silence, trauma, and injustice. Let this be a lesson not just in individual behavior, but in institutional reflection. Bias must be rooted out not just at the level of attitudes, but at the level of expectations, of how we treat people, how we train our officers, and how we define justice. Because the truth is, integrity must live in every encounter, not just when power walks into the room. In the story of a black man being stopped by a white officer, the immediate tone of the encounter reflects more than just a routine check. It reflects the quiet, almost invisible force of racial bias that takes hold before a single word is exchanged. The officer's posture, his tone, the way he asks questions, the suspicion he doesn't even try to conceal. All of it stems from a presumption. This presumption that the man in front of him is somehow suspicious, threatening, or undeserving of ordinary civility doesn't arise from any behavior or action on the part of the man. It arises from something far more dangerous and ingrained: automatic association between blackness and criminality. This kind of bias operates silently, even unconsciously, and that is what makes it so insidious. The interaction begins before any law is cited or any ID is checked. It begins with a glance, with a decision made in an instant, that this person must be handled with control, with caution, maybe even hostility. This is the first place where injustice happens. It is not in the shouting, the aggression, or even the potential physical force. It is in the mental calculus made by the officer, shaped by years of social conditioning, cultural messages, and possibly institutional reinforcement. The officer sees a black man and assumes he needs to be managed, not understood. He assumes danger, not dignity. He sees a potential problem, not a fellow human being. What this demonstrates is that racial bias isn't always expressed in overt acts of violence or explicit slurs. It's often hidden in body language, in a raised voice, in an accusatory tone, or in the decision to escalate instead of de-escalate. It shows up when someone is spoken to with a lack of respect, when questions are barked rather than asked, and when a person's presence is met with tension instead of neutrality. These subtle signs are often dismissed, overlooked, or minimized by those who don't experience them directly, but they are felt deeply by those who do. The psychological toll of always being seen as a suspect rather than a citizen is heavy. It wears people down, creates fear, fosters anger, and damages trust. Moreover, the fact that this kind of bias operates before any conscious decision is made speaks to how embedded it is in our culture. It's in the media portrayals that constantly link blackness to danger. It's in the language we use when talking about crime or behavior. It's in the training, formal or informal, that police officers receive, which often emphasizes control over compassion, compliance over conversation. By the time an officer steps out of their car to approach a stopped vehicle, their mind may already be filled with cues that tell them to prepare for the worst. And too often, that worst is imagined more readily when the person in the car is black. This first moment of contact, shaped entirely by bias, matters immensely. It sets the tone for everything that follows. When someone is approached with suspicion rather than fairness, the conversation is no longer balanced. It becomes an exercise in control, in asserting dominance, in proving power. The person on the receiving end, even if they remain calm, respectful, and compliant, is already placed at a disadvantage. They must navigate not only the legal and procedural elements of the stop, but also the emotional burden of proving that they are not who the officer assumes them to be. And what's most telling is that all of this happens before anything factual is established. The man has not committed a crime. He hasn't posed a threat. He hasn't been disrespectful. But none of that matters in the officer's initial response, because bias doesn't wait for facts. It doesn't need evidence. It simply fills in the blanks with suspicion, fear, and assumptions drawn from years of systemic conditioning. In the end, this interaction reminds us that racism doesn't always come dressed in hatred or hostility. Sometimes, it's in a glance that lasts too long, in a question asked too sharply, or in a tone that treats someone like a threat instead of a neighbor. These moments are not isolated. They are the foundation on which deeper injustices are built. They are where bias takes root and where real change must begin. Because until we address the automatic, unspoken assumptions that shape our first reactions, we will never be able to build a society where fairness truly comes first. Respect should never be earned through power, status, or fear. It should be extended simply because a person exists, because they are human. Yet, in the story of the black man stopped by the officer, respect only enters the interaction after a badge is revealed, after a title is spoken. Before that moment, the man is treated with suspicion, approached with a lack of courtesy, spoken to harshly, and presumed to be a threat. Only when the officer realizes who he is, someone with institutional authority, does his attitude shift. The transformation is immediate. His tone softens, his posture becomes more careful, and he begins to show the kind of basic human decency that should have been there from the beginning. This sudden change reveals a harsh truth. In far too many situations, especially in encounters involving race, respect is not given freely or fairly. It is conditional. It is reserved for those who are perceived to hold power or influence, people who can do something in return. But that is not what true respect looks like. That is not justice. That is performance, and it is deeply unjust. What's most disturbing is that this dynamic plays out every day in interactions that never make headlines. There are countless instances where people are treated with disregard, even hostility, simply because they do not carry the markers of power. They are not public officials. They do not wear suits or badges. They do not have titles that command immediate reverence. As a result, they are often talked down to, disrespected, or even harmed, not because of anything they have done, but because of how they are perceived. This situation reflects the broader societal failure to separate respect from status. We have, in many ways, created a culture where status dictates how someone is treated. A uniform, a title, or a credential is often what earns a person dignity, not their character, not their behavior, and certainly not their humanity. In law enforcement, this problem is especially acute. Officers are trained to assess control, authority, and hierarchy. Unfortunately, that often translates into a skewed application of respect, where only those perceived as important are treated with decency, while others, particularly marginalized individuals, are subjected to suspicion or mistreatment. The encounter also raises an important question. What if the man had not been someone with authority? What if he had been an ordinary citizen without any special rank or position? The uncomfortable answer is that he likely would have continued to be treated as he was in the first moments of the stop, as someone unworthy of kindness, as someone to be managed, not respected. This reality should disturb all of us because it suggests that our systems are built not around fairness, but around fear and deference to power. What this reveals is a double standard that corrodes the idea of equal protection under the law. It means that dignity is not universally applied. It is selectively given. This undermines not only the credibility of institutions, but also the very foundations of democratic society, which depend on the belief that every individual, regardless of status, deserves equal treatment. When respect is reserved only for those in power, it creates a two-tiered system, one where authority protects, and another where lack of authority invites abuse. Moreover, the psychological and emotional impact of being denied respect is profound. For the person on the receiving end, it is not just about one rude comment or one aggressive tone. It is about being reminded, again and again, that they are seen as less, that their worth must be proven, that their rights are negotiable, depending on how important they appear. This damages not just individual self-worth, but erodes entire communities' trust in institutions that are supposed to protect them. The officer's behavior shift also exposes the performative nature of respect when it is rooted in self-interest. Once he discovers the man's rank, the officer isn't suddenly more compassionate. He is more cautious. He is no longer dealing with someone he can mistreat without consequence. The respect he offers now is not genuine. It is fear-based. It is a defensive maneuver, not an ethical realization. This is not how respect should function. True respect is offered freely, regardless of who the other person is, what they do, or how they are dressed. In a just society, respect must not be transactional. It must not be given only to those who matter. In the eyes of authority, it must be universal, rooted in the belief that every person, no matter their background, deserves to be treated with dignity from the very first moment of contact. Until we hold this standard, we will continue to fail the very people who most need to see justice, not just in words, but in how they are treated every day. The idea that power should not be the gateway to fair treatment is at the heart of justice, equality, and human dignity. Yet, the encounter between the officer and the black man clearly shows how deeply embedded the opposite notion is in our systems and everyday interactions. In this situation, the officer's behavior transforms not because he learns something new about the man's character or actions, but simply because he discovers the man holds a position of authority. That single fact changes the dynamic completely. The man is no longer treated with suspicion, but with deference. He is no longer seen as a threat, but as a professional, someone to be cautious around, not because of humanity, but because of hierarchy. This raises a troubling reality. Fairness, in this case, was not the starting point. It was the result of a power shift. And when fairness depends on status, it is not fairness at all. It is fear of consequence. The officer's change in attitude was not about realizing he had misjudged a fellow human being. It was about recognizing someone who could hold him accountable. That is not justice. That is survival instinct, and it shows that power, rather than principle, often dictates behavior. This kind of response is not just an individual failure. It is a symptom of a system where authority is often treated as a shield against mistreatment, while lack of authority leaves individuals exposed to harm. In a just society, everyone should be treated equally regardless of their social, economic, or professional position. A janitor, a teacher, a construction worker, or an unemployed person should receive the same respect and fair treatment as a high-ranking official. But we know this is not the case. Too often, people who hold no apparent power are subjected to rude, dismissive, or even aggressive treatment, while those with titles or influence are handled with caution and politeness. This imbalance speaks to a deeper issue: the way institutions, including law enforcement, are trained to respond to perceived authority. Officers are often more careful when they know someone has the ability to report them, to influence investigations, or to bring public attention to their actions. That cautiousness, however, should not be reserved for the powerful. It should be the baseline for how all people are treated, with restraint, fairness, and respect for their rights. Power-based respect also reflects broader cultural patterns. From early on, society teaches people, implicitly or explicitly, to respect power more than people. Children learn to obey authority figures, not necessarily because of their moral integrity, but because of their role. Adults navigate workplaces and public spaces, knowing that their treatment often improves when they are seen as influential or connected. This cultural norm spills over into institutions like the police, where the lines between accountability and favoritism often blur. In encounters like the one between the officer and the black man, the core injustice is not just about race, although racial profiling clearly shaped the initial interaction. It is also about how power is used as a filter through which dignity is granted. When someone must prove their worth, their status, or their ability to retaliate before being treated with respect, that is not a free society. That is a society governed by hierarchy, not humanity. Furthermore, relying on power to access fair treatment excludes and endangers those who have no such power. Many people, particularly those from marginalized communities, do not have the means or influence to correct an injustice after it occurs. They do not have a badge to flash or a title to announce. And because of that, they are more likely to be mistreated and less likely to receive justice. This perpetuates cycles of mistrust, fear, and resentment. not just between individuals and officers, but between entire communities and the institutions that claim to serve them. When fairness is contingent on authority, what we're left with is a system where justice is unequal by design. That inequality is reinforced in every interaction where power protects and the absence of power invites risk. The ultimate goal must be a system where the rules do not shift based on who someone is or what they do, but where fairness is the default, not the reward for holding influence. The truth is simple. Dignity should never be negotiable. Fair treatment should not be the outcome of someone's rank being revealed. It should be the standard from the beginning of every encounter. Anything less is not justice. It's conditional humanity, and that is something a truly fair society cannot afford to accept. The interaction between the officer and the black man is not simply about one individual's behavior or personal prejudice. It is a reflection of a larger, deeply rooted institutional culture that influences how people in authority perceive and treat others. This particular officer did not act in isolation or invent the patterns of behavior he demonstrated. His actions were likely shaped by a system that, over time, has taught him, directly or indirectly, how to engage with certain individuals based on race, appearance, and perceived social standing. It is a culture that rewards control, assumes guilt, and often encourages dehumanization in the name of safety and order. Institutional culture is a powerful force. It is created and sustained through training programs, workplace norms, unwritten rules, and repeated behavior passed down from veteran officers to new recruits. From day one, law enforcement officers are socialized into an environment where authority must be asserted, control must be maintained, and certain groups, especially people of color, are viewed as more likely to pose a threat. These are not always formal teachings, but they are absorbed through observation, repetition, and the behavior that gets praised or excused. This is why focusing on individual bad apples is not enough. It may be easier to place blame on one officer and dismiss the incident as a personal failing, but that does nothing to address the underlying structure that allows, and often normalizes, such conduct. If one officer treats someone unfairly, it is often because he has seen that behavior go unchecked or even rewarded. He may have been taught to view certain people as suspects before they speak, or to assume non-compliance when there is simply confusion or fear. These behaviors are not random. They are patterned responses built into the institutional mindset. The shift in the officer's behavior, once he learns the identity of the man he stopped his telling. It demonstrates how quickly the officer can adjust his approach when he feels he is dealing with someone who understands the system and who has the power to challenge it. That kind of change doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens because the officer knows, consciously or not, that there are rules for dealing with people of power and different rules for everyone else. This points directly to how institutions condition behavior based on perceived status. Training also plays a significant role in shaping this culture. Many law enforcement agencies emphasize tactics, compliance, and officer safety over empathy, communication, and cultural awareness. Officers are taught how to gain control, how to protect themselves, and how to recognize danger. But far less often are they trained in how to listen, how to de-escalate situations peacefully, or how to confront their own biases. When training is focused on authority rather than service, it produces officers who view every interaction as a potential threat and every person as a potential enemy. especially if that person fits a profile they've been taught to fear. Moreover, institutional culture is reinforced by what is allowed to continue without consequence. When officers are not held accountable for racial profiling, unnecessary force, or disrespectful treatment, it sends a message to others that such behavior is acceptable. Over time, this creates a workplace where bias is normalized and even defended. Officers learn not only how to behave, but also what they can get away with, and for whom they must show restraint. The consequences of this are far-reaching. Communities of color, in particular, become targets of a system that was never designed with their safety in mind. They learn that justice is not equally applied, that their word carries less weight, and that their safety is often treated as an afterthought. This creates deep divisions and a lack of trust that makes cooperation with law enforcement difficult, even when it is most needed. The reality is that changing individual attitudes will never be enough if the system that supports those attitudes remains intact. We must look at how institutions train, supervise, and discipline their members. We must examine what behaviors are being modeled and rewarded, and we must be honest about how institutional culture has allowed discrimination and disrespect to be passed off as standard procedure. What happened in that traffic stop was not just one man's mistake. It was the result of a larger machine at work, one that has been running for decades. To dismantle it, we need more than apologies or sensitivity training. We need a fundamental shift in how institutions define authority, how they train their agents, and how they hold them accountable. Not just for what they do, but for how and why they do it. Only then can real justice begin to take shape. The incident, where a black man was stopped by a white officer, only to later be revealed as the head of internal affairs, may have ended with a moment of clarity for the officer. But this was an exception, not the rule. Most such encounters do not end in realization, accountability, or even acknowledgement. They occur in silence, in the shadows of daily life, where no title is revealed, no mistake is admitted, and no power shift occurs to protect the person being mistreated. This is the harsh truth behind many interactions between marginalized individuals and those in authority. The injustices that unfold go unseen, unreported, and unresolved. For every story that gains attention, where a person of influence is wrongfully profiled or disrespected, only for their status to force a reversal, there are countless others where the person has no recourse. They are not heads of departments, judges, politicians, or public figures. They are everyday people, students, workers, parents, elders, teenagers. And for them, the outcome is very different. They do not get apologies. They do not see an officer suddenly shift to respectful behavior. Instead, they are often left with lasting trauma, legal repercussions, or physical harm with no pathway for justice or even basic acknowledgement. These daily injustices are woven into the fabric of society in ways that are easy to miss if one is not directly affected. They take the form of casual disrespect, unnecessary stops, excessive questioning, aggressive tone, and unwarranted searches. They are not always violent or headline-grabbing, but they are harmful all the same. Each instance reinforces the message that some lives are treated as more suspicious, less credible, and less deserving of care than others. Over time, these moments accumulate into a deep, collective pain, a feeling of being constantly watched, judged, and endangered by systems meant to protect. What makes these invisible injustices especially dangerous is that they often leave no proof. There's no camera recording, No body cam footage is released. The person who experiences it may not even report it, either out of fear, hopelessness, or a belief that nothing will change. And often, they are right. Complaints are dismissed. Accusations are minimized. The burden of proof is placed on the person already harmed, while institutions protect their own. As a result, the stories never leave the street corners or squad cars where they happen. They are carried home, into families and communities that are already bearing the weight of generational mistreatment. This silence around everyday injustice fosters an illusion for those who do not experience it. To them, the system appears fair and functional. They see officers as protectors, institutions as neutral, and racial bias as the exception rather than the rule. But this perception exists only because the realities faced by others remain invisible to them. It is a privilege not to notice the fear in someone's eyes when they hear a siren, or the way people of color tense up during routine encounters with authority. It is a privilege to move through the world without being routinely questioned, surveilled, or disrespected. These unacknowledged injustices also carry long-term consequences. They create deep mistrust between communities and law enforcement. They discourage cooperation with authorities, even when help is needed. They affect mental health, feeding anxiety, anger, and feelings of powerlessness. They erode any sense that justice is truly blind or that rights are applied equally. And they drive home the message, again and again, that to be black or brown in many societies is to be presumed guilty until proven innocent, and even then, not always believed. The weight of these daily indignities should not be underestimated. They are not small, simply because they do not result in arrests or violence. They are part of a larger pattern that shapes how entire groups of people experience their own country. They are part of why conversations about race, justice, and reform are so emotionally charged. They are not about isolated incidents, but about lived reality, one that is exhausting, frustrating, and too often ignored by those in power. The story of the officer who changed his behavior upon learning the man's identity is only powerful because it ended differently than most. But we cannot build justice on exceptions. We must build it on the understanding that unseen injustices are happening every day to people who will never be able to correct the power imbalance in the moment. These moments, though quiet, speak volumes. They tell us where the system is failing and who it is failing most. And until those unheard stories are brought into the light, any conversation about justice will remain incomplete. One of the most revealing aspects of the interaction between the officer and the black man, who turned out to be the head of internal affairs, is the dramatic shift in the officer's demeanor the moment he realized the man had power. Before this revelation, the officer approached the situation with suspicion and authority, displaying a dismissive and perhaps even aggressive attitude. But once the man's identity became known, the officer's tone softened, his body language changed, and his approach became almost apologetic. This immediate reversal raises an unsettling question. Was the respect that followed genuine, or was it simply a reaction to the fear of consequences? What this moment exposed was not a newfound sense of fairness or recognition of human dignity. It exposed performative respect, respect that is not rooted in principle or mutual regard, but in fear of exposure, punishment, or accountability. The officer did not suddenly develop empathy. He recognized a threat to his own position. The courtesy he extended thereafter was a defensive act, not an ethical choice. And this kind of behavior is far more common than many people realize. Performative respect is a hollow form of civility. It does not reflect an internal value system that sees others as equals. It is conditional, transactional, and entirely dependent on who someone is perceived to be. The problem with this kind of behavior is that it maintains the appearance of fairness without delivering the reality of it. It allows individuals and institutions to claim they are respectful or unbiased simply because they behave appropriately in specific situations, usually when being watched or when dealing with someone of influence. But such respect disappears the moment the perceived power dynamic changes. This has serious implications for public trust, especially in communities that are frequently marginalized. People know when they are being treated differently because of who they are or what they look like. They can feel the difference in tone, body language, and treatment. When they see those in authority offering respect, only when they feel threatened or exposed, it deepens their mistrust in the system. It confirms what they already suspect, that fairness is not the default. It is the exception. That dignity is not afforded to all. It is reserved for those who can demand it. Furthermore, performative respect contributes to a culture of insincerity and superficial accountability. It allows individuals to avoid confronting their own biases because they can point to moments when they acted appropriately. It allows institutions to claim progress or neutrality without addressing the deeper structural problems that produce discriminatory behavior in the first place. But respectful behavior in response to power is not a sign of fairness. It is a survival strategy. It protects the reputation of the institution and the individual, not the rights or dignity of the person involved. The most dangerous aspect of this performative behavior is that it reinforces inequality under the guise of professionalism. Those without power, status, or institutional backing are left vulnerable to mistreatment, while those with power receive the benefit of the doubt and the courtesy of respect. This dual standard is not only unjust, it is corrosive to the values of equality and integrity. It undermines the legitimacy of institutions tasked with upholding justice, because it reveals that those institutions often operate on fear of consequence, not on a foundation of fairness. Respect must not be something that is only offered once a badge is seen or a title is mentioned. It must be an automatic, unconditional part of every interaction, especially those involving authority figures. The measure of a fair system is not how well it treats the powerful, but how consistently it upholds the dignity of those with no influence, no title, and no ability to defend themselves in the moment. True respect is grounded in empathy, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to justice. It is shown not just when people are looking, but when they are not. It is practiced not just with those who can hold us accountable, but especially with those who cannot. Anything less than this is not real respect. It is a performance. And while performance may protect reputations in the short term, it cannot build the kind of trust, equity, and justice that society so desperately needs. The officer's change in behavior was not a moment of transformation. It was a moment of exposure. It showed how easily respect is withheld until power demands it, and how fragile that kind of respect truly is. If we want to live in a society where justice is real and meaningful, we must insist on something deeper. Respect that begins with humanity, not with hierarchy.